Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
I can officially say that my life is complete because I had the privilege and the honor of having Ken Daniels narrate a birdie putt, which I made.
I don't root against you on the golf course. That's not the dynamic we have, but I've never wanted you to miss a 3-footer so bad in my life. It wasn't even 3 feet. It was like 2 feet.
The content would have been
I should have
incredible.
given it to you, but yeah, the content, actually, you ruined the clip because you edited it and it's now like stop motion. But
I'm a boomer. It's claymation. It's so bad now.
But it was cool for Ken to narrate it. I'm glad we got that because those greens were, I don't know how Ken plays on those greens all the time. They were diabolical.
Wild. Just wild.
Very cool. Little Winged Wheel Podcast field trip to see where Ken, he hammers the ball, man.
Oh, yeah. He sells himself short. Like, he's a great golfer.
He moves that thing.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. Folks, the end of the offseason is nearing because we are getting, thoughts and notes on training camp and who's attending. We're getting offer sheets, which actually that barely ever happens in the NHL. So that's cool. We are getting conversations from players talking about wanting to make the team. A lot is happening and is starting to pick up in the world of hockey. So we are getting into that last phase of the offseason, but we're still here with you to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and more. I'm one of your hosts of the Winged Wheel Podcast, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we're going to talk to you a little bit about training camp and who's attending and who's not. And then we're going to jump into what will be the most exciting part of this episode, which is an interview with a returning special guest star, Carter Mazur of the Grand Rapids Griffins, and hopefully for him, the Detroit Red Wings in the near future. After that, we're going to be talking to you about some other Red Wings notes before we get into the, pretty atypical news in the NHL, which is offer sheets. And yes, offer sheets, more than one, which was exciting. And we'll talk about, what goes into those offer sheets, how they might relate to Seider and Raymond, and more. We'll talk about other NHL news before jumping into overtime. Before all that, just to make it quick, I want to let you know Winged Wheel Podcast Night at the LCA is Saturday, November 9th. Go to the link in the description or go to wingedwheelpodcast.com/Red Wings to get your tickets. We have secured 100 more tickets, and that is the max that we're able to do. So there's about 100 of them left. You get access to the event at a discounted rate. So that is the game ticket and the event ticket where we host a live episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. You get a special limited edition co-branded Detroit Red Wings and Winged Wheel Podcast jersey that's officially licensed. There's giveaways, meet and greet with the host, Ken Daniels, other special guests, and lots more. So again, wingedwheelpodcast.com/Red Wings or go to the link in the description. Let's jump right into the content here. The Red Wings training camp. We were excited there for a second because we thought both MBN and ASP, so that's Michael Brandsegg-Nygard and Axel Sandin Pellikka, would be at training camp this year, but it turns out there's a clarification afterwards. Sandin Pellikka said no, he's going to stay in Sweden, but we are going to see Brandsegg-Nygard there. So, it was really exciting for a moment, but it makes sense that ASP is going to stay over in Sweden. At the very least, we get to see how MBN stacks up against, Red Wings hopefuls, surefire Red Wings, and others.
Yeah, it'll be good for him to get a taste of what this level of hockey is going to be, what the expectations are. ASP's had a year in the organization, so he's probably got a really good idea about what that is and what that's going to be like by now, just through, again, a year's worth of conversations with the team and attending whatever team events he can. And MBN is coming in, bright eyes, bushy tail, first time in an environment like this. So I get it, especially with ASP coming off an injury last year and, the World Juniors, and a little continuity to his schedule is probably a huge advantage to him, where he's just going to be in this place from now until the World Juniors. Work on your game, figure out whatever you want to figure out, and just worry about getting better at hockey. Whereas MBN's much more in the information gathering stage of his development. So it makes sense to me. It's a little weird they play in the same league, same organization, and only one of them is coming. But given where they're at, it makes sense.
With the training camp process, and that starts with, development of the prospects through the prospect tournament and seeing how they stack up in actual training camp. There's going to be a lot of conversation about who could actually make the team. And, the byline for all of this is going to be the same that it's been for years, which is that the Red Wings have a lot of NHL players signed and expected to make the roster. So who actually is going to make it on talent and who can even push someone out? It's going to be a tight squeeze. So that is what's coming. But putting all that aside for a moment, what are the chances that we see Michael Brandsegg-Nygard do a little bit of what Nate Danielson did, which was come in with zero expectations and surprise people with how ready he could be and have people saying, you know, they can put him on the team today and you wouldn't be able to bat an eye about it.
Oh, you answered the question with the question in the term zero expectations. So I'm going to say low. And I don't think his game's as well-rounded as Danielson's was. I think he's got a more dynamic shot, but as we've learned, that's the least translatable skill to turning into an elite NHL player. He does have a lot of other good tools, but not as refined as Danielson. And even Danielson beat the odds and defied expectation, which is outside the normal course of how a prospect approaches these situations and how they do in these situations. So as long as MBN doesn't look out of place, I take that as a big win. I don't expect him to be, sitting there in the last day of the preseason going, you think he might?
We named Nate Danielson another player who's going to be at the top of a lot of lists of, he could push for the Red Wings roster is Carter Mazur, who we talked to recently, asked him about how his summer and training is going, what he's prioritizing to help himself make the Red Wings roster, what he feels his expectations are, and more. So let's jump into that interview where we sat down and talked to returning special guest star and friend of the Winged Wheel podcast, Carter Mazur. Enjoy.
Carter Mazur. We made you promise you'd be back, and actually we kind of gave you a little bit of trouble in connecting here, but welcome back to the Winged Wheel podcast, man. How have you been?
I've been good. I appreciate you guys having me. Sorry for the trouble, but hey, I'm here.
No, it's all good, and you have some company over there in your hockey house. You're up with your brother and Shai Buyam, as we understand.
Yep, absolutely. It's been a good time so far, but it's nice finally being back home, being able to live with my brother. It makes me feel a lot more comfortable in what I'm doing, so it's been pretty nice.
And so just to jump right into it, that's what your off season's been doing, recharging and still getting some skates in. I think you're out of skate today. Yeah,
absolutely. Been up in Detroit the whole summer, training with a bunch of guys there. Keenan Draper, Sebastian Cossa was there, Shai, Cross Hannes. There's a bunch of guys there. So it's been a really fun summer so far, and I look forward to continuing that with those guys and getting ready for the season.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you is, do you spend a lot of time on the ice during the summer? I know some guys like to get away and then only really pick it up, maybe a month or so before camp. Like, what's your typical routine look like for the offseason?
So it's kind of pretty new because last year with the Worlds, I didn't really have that long of an off season. So it has been a little bit different this season actually kind of not really. We still made it pretty far in playoffs, so it's kind of the same way. But I took about 2 weeks off the ice, 2 weeks away from everything, kind of just to recharge, be at home with family, and just enjoy my time off. And then with my where I'm at in my hockey career, I feel like it was 2 weeks is enough. I'm trying to shoot for the big club, especially this year. So the weight room's been somewhere where I've been living the whole summer. I needed to put on weight, and I feel like, especially training in Detroit, I have all the resources around me to do that. And I feel like it's been really successful off season so far, and it's just like I'm itching to get back and playing and get to training camp because, especially getting hurt last year, I'm kind of excited to really see how I am compared to all these guys that I'm going up against. And skating wise, started off about 3 times a week, but now it's ramped up to around 4 or 5.
When you do the off season programs, are those sort of, I don't want to say team oriented, but they sort of hand you something and they give you the resources and they're like, hey, follow this program? Or is it more so, you're working with your own guys and obviously with Shai Buyam and Cossa as well? Like, how does that all come together?
Yeah, we're kind of all doing the same workouts in a way, but different in their own ways. That's kind of how I would kind of explain it. But Rob, the trainer in Detroit, he's an unbelievable trainer, and he knows exactly what he's doing with certain people and what their goals want to be and their body in the weight room and how to get it ready for an 82-game season. So he's been really good at that, and he's usually around. We only have 6 guys in there at a time, 5 guys, so it's not like it's overcrowded. It's like he can still watch everyone do their exercises and correct them. So I feel like we're a little bit different because it makes sense. Coast is 6'6", I'm 6'1", 185 now, and he's trying to get better at one thing. So they are different in a way, but it's just kind of all the same in a way too.
I'm glad you jumped right into saying you wanted to make the big club. It's not a hot take. Like, we're not going to be driving clicks here with that, but obviously you want to make the team, and you're known as one of the most NHL-ready prospects in Detroit's system. But a thing we talk about a lot is this isn't, the Red Wings from 5-6 years ago. You now have, Nate Danielson, who's probably ready to come up pretty soon. Marco Kasper, who's in that same boat as you. How do you kind of view this offseason differently compared to previous ones where it might have been, oh, it would have been nice to make it, but you're destined for the Griffins? Does this one feel like, what's the pressure like? What's the intensity like in your mind?
Yeah, I would say it's there. Like, I get that it's not a rush to get there. I feel like there still is a lot of room to develop as a hockey player, but you can develop either where you're in the AHL or Detroit, I feel like. But I feel like I don't really put that too much pressure on me to make the big club. I know I have a really good opportunity to make the big club, so that's kind of how I'm viewing it, is might as well make the most of it. It's something that's right in front of me. It's a dream that I've always dreamt about since I've been 4 years old, especially throwing on a Red Wings jersey, and it's in my control. I just have to show up and play my game and just know that I'm good enough to play in the NHL. It's just the fact of going out there and doing it.
So you say play your game, and something that I love from a previous interview you had with us is when we did the Tyler Bertuzzi comparison, and you're like, I get it, but I don't want to be Tyler Bertuzzi. I want to be Carter Mazur, and we love that. So what is your game, and to extend off of that, how do you see your game fitting into the Red Wings if you were to make it? Like, what do you think you can do on the ice in the winged wheel this season?
Yeah, I view myself as a up and down the lineup player. I can play anywhere. I want to be more involved in the penalty kill this year. I want to be a power play guy, but I get that at the next level, it's hard to be a power play guy. You got to really work for it and earn your spot. So the way I'm kind of viewing things is how I'm playing is I'm going to play as a bottom six player in the NHL and hopefully work my way up and show that I am worth more than a bottom six player, because I know I am deep down, and I know I can produce at a level in the NHL that I feel like is very acceptable. It's just the fact of me going out there and doing that. I know you can talk about it. It kind of sucks to talk about it, honestly, talking about those things, because the opportunity hasn't happened. But when the opportunity comes, I know I'll be ready for it.
See, I think you lean into this all the way, up and down the lineup, even including goalies. So the next time Cossa lets one in practice, you go come out in pads and let him know that his job's not safe either.
I might have to do that to him, but I think he's doing a good enough job saving pucks, so he'll be all right.
Wanted to sort of rewind, talk about the Griffins playoff run a little bit. We connected with you in the middle of the season, sort of checked in how things were going. And now that the season's wrapped up, you guys had a deep playoff run. How do you feel your first season went in, I guess, professional hockey? Maybe from a team perspective as well as your own personal perspective.
Yeah, it was a really fun year. It was a year of growth for sure. I had to learn a lot. I actually had to protect myself more, which makes sense, playing bigger guys. And I felt like to start the year was pretty slow. Our team was pretty slow. I feel like the moment when we really started playing good was Texas series. That was late December before the break. I felt like that's kind of when the whole season switched. And then that streak we went on was probably the most fun hockey I've ever played, because we're winning games and putting up points and knowing we're a team that can compete every single night. And that was kind of the best feeling about that. And then our fans in GR were unbelievable. That's something I honestly didn't expect. Especially being a Detroit kid growing up, it's not like I watched GR or went to any GR games, which is kind of crazy, because seeing that atmosphere, I kind of wish I did. But the season was a lot of growth for me. I felt like I really did grow, and I came to life when it really mattered the most, and that's in playoffs. And it took a while to get there, but now knowing what I know by how the AHL plays and pro hockey style, I feel like that was just a really good growth year, and it's just kind of puts me in a good mood or makes me more excited to just start next year right now.
I'm surprised you said you had to learn to protect yourself, considering you had known goons Simon Edvinsson and Jonatan Berggren on your team, but yeah, that's understandable.
Yeah, he's a scary guy in practice. You don't want to get touched by him. So
That's right.
speaking of your teammates, something that you mentioned when we spoke previously was, Johansson was probably one of the most underappreciated players. And you went further to say a lot of nights he was your best player on the ice. Now, the Red Wings fans know who Simon Edvinsson is. One, it's hard to miss him, and two, he's played some games now. But with Johansson, Yzerman said going to be on the roster, the whole waiver exemption thing kind of puts him there. What do you expect from him, or what do you think he can do? With the obvious connotation of it's awkward to talk about what your teammate is or isn't going to do at the NHL level, but fans are kind of hopeful, but he's still kind of a mystery.
Yeah, he is a mystery type player, especially in the Red Wings kind of world prospect wise. But I would say that you are getting a top 6. I can't say where in the lineup. I don't really know because I'm not Steve Yzerman, but he's a D-man that will show up every single night, and you're knowing exactly what you're going to get from him. You know he's going to be one of the best defenders on the team. You know his skating's unbelievable, and he just makes the right decisions. He's not a guy that's going to be flashy and put up a lot of points, but he's a D that helps you win hockey games, and that's kind of what you really need on a team, especially when you got guys like Seider and Simon Edvinsson who can be the guys who put up points. So he's that kind of fill-in guy who can play with those guys and let them do what they want to do, and he can be the shutdown D and just really add to a team's depth in the defense part.
Jumping back to your game, it seems like you're pretty aware of what you kind of have to do, what you have to work on, where the transitional moments were in the season for you. But is there kind of one big takeaway you have maybe from the end of the season compared to the start where you're like, this is something that I learned about the pro game that I'm going to now weaponize this summer to help me get to the NHL next season?
Yeah, I would say more just trusting in your game. It's kind of hard your first year to really go out there every single night and know that you can perform. I feel like you're playing in different buildings, you're playing against different opponents, and it is a lot different. It's a lot different to just trust in your game. And I think that a confident hockey player is one of the best hockey players on the ice because they know they can do it. And everyone at this level can play elite level hockey. It's just the people that really kind of, I wouldn't say have that cockiness to them, but they know they are a good player. I learned that a lot from Bergie. He's a guy that shows it. He shows that he's the man, and he was the man. It's just kind of like people are scared to like come around him because they're going to get embarrassed. So it's like learning and picking up things from like those guys, even though they're great guys off the ice. I'm not saying Bergie's cocky or anything away, like chirping us or anything about it, but it's just like those little things that are easily you can pick up and use during the year. And I think that would probably be the big one for me.
You had Dan Watson this year in GR. Just curious if you had any end of season thoughts for you on how to take the next step. What's your relationship continuing to look like with him?
Yeah, he was an unbelievable coach. He was a great coach to have behind the bench, especially when we were going through tough stretches. He's played a lot of games and hockey and coached a lot of games, so he kind of knew what to do to settle us down. But he just told me to keep working at what I do. It's something that not a lot of people, I think, play the game anymore. I think it's more a relating skill, but I need to use my skill as well as my physical abilities. And the big thing that everyone kept saying is that I need to gain weight, and that's the big one for everyone mostly. But he's saying that my skill's there. It's just the fact of when you're ready to take that opportunity, just make the most of it.
Carter, you mentioned to us that you have Shai Buium living with you. Is this like your way of kind of giving back to the next phase or next wave of hopeful Red Wings prospects? Like, did you kind of get that mentorship and you're now able to translate that, or are you guys just buddies?
Yeah, I actually like the way you put it, so we'll go with that. But no, he's just been a good friend. We roomed with each other freshman year at Denver, and he said he was coming up here, and I feel like getting a hotel, spending $100 a night is pretty expensive, especially for a guy who just signed. So I was like, you can stay here if you want, and we can just spend time together and just train together because we're doing the same thing anyway, so might as well just live here. But I like the way you put it. We'll just stick with that. Who's
the house cook? Who's doing the laundry?
Yeah, no, we're doing it all our own. I'm not doing any of that, that's for sure. But I'm cooking a little bit here and there, but he does his own thing, I do my own thing, but we do it kind of all together still. I don't know. He's just a different guy, but it's fun to be around.
On the other side of it, you don't hear too much about it, but do you ever kind of get in touch with guys who have made it or guys on the Red Wings that either you knew previous or maybe just for the sake of trying to get that thought of, hey, can I skate with you? Can I lift with you? Or get their perspectives on things?
Yeah, so Rasmussen and Sherrod and Petrie are actually working out downtown, so it's really easy to kind of watch what they do, especially Rasmussen. He's a perfect example of a player that I kind of want to follow, even though he did take a different route, but he's done it the right way, exactly how I want to be. I want to do everything the right way, put in the work to get rewarded and be in the lineup. It's just easy to pick up things from him or ask him about things around the rink, that what he does. And you don't even need to ask him. You can just watch him and just how he takes care of himself away from the rink, at the rink, and then how he skates and just how much he really cares. Because usually in skates with like prospects, like people are kind of like not really going hard at each other. And then when they come on the ice, you can notice like a little bit more of a jump in other people because he's actually going around like kind of pushing you around and like kind of like pushing you in a way. So I feel like just having those guys around the rink has kind of been pretty huge this summer.
We're about a month or so away from Red Wings training camp. Any, final things you're working on? I know some guys like to take some time away. I don't know what your sort of schedule is looking like for the next little bit just to prepare yourself.
Yeah, we just been working on skating mostly. Skating's always the thing that can get better. Everyone knows how to shoot. Everyone knows how to pass. So skating's a big one for me. I want to be more powerful and quicker in how I skate and use less energy. That's probably a big one for me. And then I would also say goal scoring, another thing. That's something I want to do. So just working on the shot and placement and all that with Dwayne Blaze. And we do that every day. So it's been pretty nice. It's been really nice actually because it's free ice, free workouts. You get meals at the rink. It's been pretty nice. I can't complain on what I'm doing with Detroit right now.
And on that note, you talk a lot about hockey. It's very obvious. Like you're locked in, you know what your goal is, but what's Carter Mazur's offseason outside of the rink? Like what are you doing for fun? What are you doing to recharge and just kind of rest the soul a little bit before you get back into the grind?
Yeah, the big thing for me is golf. I can golf every single day. That's probably
tough.
Yeah,
it's tough.
It's a pretty usual answer I get for a lot of hockey players, but it's just something that's easy to do and get away from the rink and just get out and be outside. I would say golf is for sure the number one for me.
All right, man. We'll see you later this week. Let's go play.
Perfect. Get a tee time.
Yeah. All right. On that note, Carter, we'll definitely talk to you again sometime. Best of luck in your upcoming training camp and audition with the Red Wings. But no matter what, whether it's in Hockeytown or whether it's in Grand Rapids, we're excited to watch your continued development. And thanks for jumping on the show again, man. I mean it. Let's play sometime, but let's definitely keep chatting.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on again. And yeah, I would take some money from you guys. So let's do that.
It won't be hard with me. You might have a little bit more trouble with Evan, but it won't be hard with me.
Welcome back. That was our conversation with Carter Mazur. Extremely driven guy. Like, it's not a surprise if you go back to our first conversation with him on the show previous. He was, talked a lot about wanting to be his own player and, not just be in the background. Like he wanted to be at the forefront of who people thought of when they thought of Red Wings potential players out of their prospects. And for him to, be upfront and honest, it goes to show you the different mentality pro athletes have when it comes to what they think that they can accomplish. And you have to respect it. And in all fairness, like he's up there with Kasper and Danielson of this guy should be able to make the Red Wings roster, if not right away, relatively soon.
I think he's doing all the right things. He's working with the right guys and he clearly has the right mindset. So he's got to be near the top of the list to make the Red Wings if any young guys are going to make it.
I wish my off-season priority was to just gain as much weight as possible. That's the dream, man.
Well, they always say, I'm going to be a professional eater in the off-season. I say I've been doing that for like 10, 15 years.
And here you are sitting with me and Brad.
That's right.
In a home studio. So whatever you're doing, you're not doing it the right way.
Yeah, the 15-year bulk.
The cut's coming one day.
One day. What a cut it'll be.
Not today, though.
No.
Too tired. Okay, let's jump into some other notes about the Red Wings before we jump into the very exciting league news. Credit to Ice Hockey Gifts on Twitter for noting this one, but just mentioning that Marco Kasper is expected to join Team Austria, and Michael Brandsegg-Nygard will join Team Norway for Olympic qualification games at the end of the month. So that is around August 29th to September 1st. unsurprising considering, the caliber of players coming out of those countries. They aren't as plentiful as, Sweden or Canada, the States have, but very exciting for us to have more looks at Red Wings prospects. And in terms of Red Wings prospects, the Traverse City Prospect Tournament is forever dwindling. It's just going to be a 2-game series against Dallas on Saturday, September 14th and Sunday, September 15th. It's kind of a bummer. Like, you understand with travel and logistics and stuff, teams want to do their own thing and cut costs and things like that. But, thank goodness for friend of the Detroit Red Wings, Jim Nill, for keeping this thing alive. And then training camp is going to be right after that. So the morning of Thursday, September 19th, the Red Wings announced training camp is going to kick off and continue daily through Sunday, September 22nd. The Red Wings players, prospects, and the tryouts themselves will be divided into teams that will practice and scrimmage throughout camp, including the always exciting annual red and white game on Sunday, September 22nd, to cap things off. So that is what the training camp schedule is going to look like. Not far away. That's a blink of an eye.
You think the Red Wings will bring in any PTOs?
They always do, and
yeah,
teams usually do at this point. It's part of it is just to have like bodies for the exhibition games and things like that. You essentially playing 2 teams, and you don't want to burn players out, and there's certain rules around how many veteran players you play, that kind of thing. So there will be PTOs and guys who they don't have a chance in hell of making the team either in terms of like young prospects or aging veterans, but it's always for every team in the league. This is going to be part of the process.
Red Wings legend UC Jokinen.
Oh my God.
He's the only PTO I can actually remember. I know there's dozens, but he's the only one I can remember.
Man, imagine he made it. I loved UC Jokinen, showing, a different era here of knowledge. And this is probably remembered by some, and some people might not have been around to really appreciate it. But people think of Pavel Datsyuk as a shootout expert. Jokinen was like the first shootout expert.
And he only had 2 moves.
That's right.
He came down the right side as a left shot, and he was either going over the far pad or he was pulling the Forsberg. And the setup for both is exactly the same. And if the goalie guessed wrong, he was cooked.
It was easy for people to label someone as a shootout specialist, but very few players actually carried that ability. And he's, I think, the foremost of that initial generation as the teams figured out and players figured out how to do the shootout. Anyhow, that's going to be the training camp schedule. That is going to be a big conversation of what do the Red Wings do in terms of, do any of the young guys make it? And you don't really know, like, you can make all the predictions you want. A prospect can force their hand, but if these guys all come out and no one really kind of makes a decision for them, then you almost have your answer just by who the Red Wings have signed. So we'll see, and we'll see what chemistry is drummed up between the players as well. Okay, let's jump into the news from the NHL that was shocking. Offer sheets almost never happen. Offer sheets are when another NHL team basically signs a different team's eligible restricted free agent to a contract, and then the original team has 7 days to match that contract down to the letter. The stipulation here is that if they match the contract, then they keep the player. They can't trade him for a year, and it's the contract as signed. And if it is chosen to not match, so in this case, Edmonton and St. Louis are the 2 teams involved. If Edmonton chooses to not match, then St. Louis has to offer them compensation based on the value of the contract. So what happened was St. Louis went to cash-strapped Edmonton Oilers, and they signed defenseman Philip Broberg to a 2-year, $4.580917 million contract per year. And I'll talk about why that number is important in a second. And they signed Dylan Holloway to a 2-year, $2.290457 million contract. So that is 2 different RFAs, both signed within seconds of each other, like at the exact same time. And the return on the Broberg contract would be a 2nd-round pick, and a return on the Holloway contract would be a 3rd-round pick if Edmonton chooses to not match those contracts. They gave them the maximum amount of money possible before they jumped up to the next level of compensation, respectively. So
$1 more, they would have moved into the next tier.
$1 more. You don't see offer sheets in the NHL because GMs think it's like, against their unwritten code and it destroys the sanctity of the brotherhood and all that. And you don't see it because oftentimes the return is prohibitive. It's kind of designed where the compensation is too high to really take that risk. So to see 2 at once it's a lot of fun. as a Red Wings fan, I'm kind of tempting fate by saying that, but we'll put that off for a moment. So initial thoughts on these two offer sheets.
This is how they should be used. Every time we have the offer sheet conversation, it's around some superstar who's going to cost $12 million, where the team would immediately match whatever the offer is because they can't afford to lose said player, and they would move heaven and earth to move said superstar. Now, for players of this caliber, young, unproven, not likely to be stars, but middle of the lineup players who in theory could have more potential than what they've shown, being hardballed by a team that is right up against the cap. The compensation for Edmonton here almost doesn't matter, which is why St. Louis structured it the way it did, because we've had the conversations about how much do you have to get in return before you consider not matching it. It would have to be substantial. This isn't substantial, but unless Edmonton has a few things fall their way or make a few moves, they can't match these. And that's where St. Louis got smart. St. Louis is a team stuck in the murky middle, don't really want to enter a rebuild, got a lot of aging contracts of aging players, so they can't really fully rebuild. So they have to find a way to improve and get younger, which, as we've learned as Red Wings fans, is a very slow, difficult process. St. Louis is trying to jump the line a little bit here, and smartly so. I don't think they're going to get both of these players. I think Edmonton matches Holloway pretty easy. Broberg's where it gets interesting because they can't. Rumors are now the Oilers are shopping CC or Kulak to free up the cap space to match, because obviously Broberg's younger and would fill a similar role. But they'd have to give up a sweetener to unload those guys. How much are they willing to unload to overpay Philip Broberg? Because he's not worth that contract right now, but it's only 2 years, and that's why St. Louis did it.
Broberg was rumored to be looking for a contract in the $1.8 million range. So you're talking 2.5 times the money is what St. Louis. It's a big risk for St. Louis. It kind of harks back to what Carolina gave Kotkaniemi, which was an overpay then too.
It's not really, though, for St. Louis. They're a team that if they don't make enough of these moves that work out, they have to rebuild anyway. You know what I'm saying? So if Broberg comes in, they pay him too much money for 2 years and he sucks, oh well, they're out a second-round pick. It was he was probably way more likely to hit than a second-round pick. Worthwhile gamble. I am fascinated to see what Edmonton's going to do. The Evander Kane injury now looms large, because if he goes on LTIR for a good chunk of the season, that changes the math and the dynamic here. If they're able to move one of the defensemen, that changes the dynamic. Edmonton just hired one of the most competent GMs in NHL history here, so this should be no problem for them.
It's extremely funny that this is happening at a Stan Bowman right away. Objectively.
Welcome back. Here's your welcome gift.
Doug Armstrong is unquestionably my favorite GM in the NHL just for this one move alone. Now,
credit to Alex Steen over there too.
Yep. So this was smart because St. Louis isn't going to give up too much to get a player because they leveraged a team properly. This wasn't just Montreal, I should say, throwing a ton of money at Sebastian Aho because he's a really good player. And then Carolina goes, well, obviously we're going to match that. This might not be feasible for the Oilers, which is why it makes sense for the Blues. Now, this is hockey. The boring outcome is almost always the correct outcome. So I'm going to guess because of the Kane injury, Edmonton's able to match both these. But the Broberg one also has the added complication of, they owe Draisaitl a lot of money next summer. And Evan Bouchard.
Well, they're working on that now. Like, the expectation is that's going to happen soon, too. So if they really want to get that done now, which they are eligible to do that extension already, then that throws a big wrench in their plans.
Yeah. How much money does Draisaitl and Bouchard add to their cap next year with the raises they're going to get? So that extra $3 million that Broberg got here matters a lot. So they might walk away from Broberg just for that reason alone. Take the second round pick and maybe flip it for a cheaper player. I don't know, but it's, again, the more I think about this, the more I really truly respect how, when, and why St. Louis did this.
I see your point, Brad, about, it made sense for St. Louis to do, because if you overpay and it doesn't work out, then who cares, because your team's rebuilding anyways. That's exactly correct. Fully agree with you in terms of strategy there. But what I am saying is that this is more than Broberg should be paid right now. He was a high pick, the defenseman taken behind Seider. Everyone knows Edmonton was gunning for Seider as well, and that's why Detroit was like, well, if we can't trade back just in front of the team that we think wants to take him, we're taking him where we did. We didn't know how that story goes. But Broberg hasn't turned out like Seider did. I agree. I think he has a lot of potential. I would have been interested in Broberg on Detroit. I think that would have been cool to see. I mean, the position and what they have in the pipeline, that's a whole different conversation. He has potential. He could turn out into more. I don't think he's like a bust pick guaranteed or anything like that, but is he worth this money? No. And does that matter if you're a St. Louis team? You're right, Brad. It does not. Does that matter if you are maybe a Cup favorite who has, multiple major superstar level contracts in terms of dollar value coming up that you have to fit into a tight cap situation when you have not been the most cap efficient team in the league, to say the least? Ken Holland has some great deals in there, and Ken Holland has some god-awful deals in there that he left for Edmonton. It's an overpay for Broberg, and that is going to be tough for them to swallow. And they're tied up too. Like, you can't trade these guys for a year. Every year from now on counts. Like, you need to be winning cups now while you have the best player on the planet, while you have someone who often has a claim to second best player on the planet, while you have a starting first pair defenseman. Like, you need to be doing this. Otherwise, you are wasting an opportunity that some franchises go entire generations without having. I really like this tactically, and one of my first thoughts was, I am tempting the hockey gods by saying this is so awesome because Seider and Raymond are ripe for the picking too. I don't think it's the same situation. Very obviously not. Like you said, Brad, that's a high dollar. You're talking multiple first round picks or more in terms of compensation for that and who can afford those contracts. But still, I was like, maybe I shouldn't be too excited too fast.
Yeah, like we both alluded to, Seider and Raymond's a completely different animal than what the Blues did to the Oilers. If someone offer sheeted Seider and or Raymond, it's an immediate match for the Red Wings because they have the cap space to do it. And if a team offers them so much money that the Red Wings just don't do it because they can't justify it, you're talking about getting 3 to 4 first-round picks back for each. And if you look around the NHL, how many contenders have the cap space to do that? None of them. So we're not talking pick 30 overall from the teams that would be able to do this. So I'm not worried at all about the Red Wings getting offer sheeted on either of them. Yeah, it would suck if, instead of paying them 8.7 each, you're paying them 9.7. That hurts. But you still have them. You still have the option to keep them, and you could very easily make it work. Like, what's the dollar figure they would have to get offer sheeted for before you say no?
Like the max level compensation is 4 first round picks. The one before that is 2 firsts, a second, and a third. But the calculation isn't so easy as their AAV. There's certain stipulations in there where they say, the total value of the contract over what a hypothetical 5-year frame would be. There's a little bit of math in there, but yeah, the $11.452 figure is in terms of millions, is the AAV where you get the max compensation, and 9.17 or 9.16 to 11.452 is the one just before that.
Yeah, because the way this is structured, any contract offered to Seider and Raymond that nets them only 2 firsts, a second, and whatever that 4th pick is, would be cheap enough or short-term enough the Red Wings would match almost immediately, because that's not enough compensation for those players, and that wouldn't put the contracts in the realm of there is no way they are going to pay that. So I think the only risk the Red Wings would run is we're talking contracts in that 4 first-round pick range, which again, is unlikely to happen. Red Wings still probably able to match, but even if they don't, you're getting 4 first-round picks out of it, so it's not the end of the world. But there's some offer sheet contenders, we'll call it, still kicking around in the RFA world. I don't think either of these guys are that. Knock on wood, because the universe has a way of screwing with us like that.
And to put it more specifically, when you get into like, no, they're not going to be making, 11 point whatever. The average annual salary is determined by dividing the total compensation, so the total value of the contract, by the lesser of the number of years or 5 years. So if the offer sheet is for 4 years, you take the AAV over 4 years. Obviously, these two Edmonton ones are 2 years, so the AAV is what it is. But if someone signs a guy to 6 to 7 to 8 years, you take the total value of the contract and divide that by 5, and that is, for the purposes of the offer sheet, the compensation level. So that's how you get into those higher numbers, even if that's not what the player is actually seeing per year. So just to give some conversation to the Seider and Raymond thing. Now, getting over to Edmonton again, they have until the 20th to decide if they're going to match. Like you mentioned, Brad, Kane is expected to have surgery, so you don't know how long he can be on LTIR, and you could punt the decision until the season. You can go over the cap, 10% in the summer, so you have some time to take care of this. The timing of this is also so smart, too. Like, St. Louis waited until the possibility of getting a buyout window from arbitration was over. They waited until, they are really in the thick of it with the Draisaitl negotiations. I think it was Friedman reported, was this Peter Chiarelli getting revenge on his old team? Ken Holland's no longer there, and could he have helped this along? It's a better fit for Broberg over in St. Louis. Like you mentioned, Brad, like there's so much that goes into this. It makes sense for St. Louis as an organization. Edmonton, like I don't want to call them a sitting duck. They're still a cup favorite, but they were sitting ducks for this to happen to them.
Nobody will have done more damage to the Edmonton Oilers than Peter Chiarelli since Wayne Gretzky went to LA.
Not wrong.
If Peter Chiarelli does more damage to the Oilers by actively, doing something very smart against them, what a turn of tides that nobody would have expected, and is the funniest possible outcome. I love it. Like I have always advocated for, I think offer sheets are a way to get around the like almost annoying stasis of the NHL. And I think compensation levels need to be adjusted to be less restrictive so that teams have an opportunity to basically get themselves out of the basement or avoid a long rebuild if they're willing to take risks like this. I say that, but I hope the NHL only changes it after it's no longer relevant to Detroit with Seider and Raymond and any others. What would you guys do if you're in Edmonton's shoes?
Well, they can't trot out Nurse and CC exclusively every single night.
Just watch them.
So I know the Philip Broberg contract is exponentially more than they thought they were going to have to pay, but I think they got to do it, right?
I think they should keep the player. I think long-term they'll regret not keeping the player because I don't know if they have enough in their system where down the road they'll feel good about letting him go. But Edmonton is one of the few teams in the league that has both the luxury and the curse of not really having to think about anything other than the immediate year or 2 years in front of them. So I don't know. It's extremely tough.
I'd have personally not signed the Nurse or CC contract, but given that you're handcuffed with that now, I would match Holloway, let Broberg go, and then use that second round pick as ammo at the deadline for a run this year while Bouchard and Draisaitl are still cheap.
That's pretty much what you're going to have to GM your way out of it, right? Like whatever decision you make, you're going to have to either use the compensation, or if you get, Broberg and Holloway both back, you're going to have to find creative ways to make the space, and you're going to have to pay the price to offload other contracts. You might have some time bought for you with Kane, but not forever. So I think whatever decision they make, there's going to need to be surgery. And like the way this is happening is unique for Edmonton, but cap strapped or teams right up against the cap, that's not new. Like you have to kind of do constant little surgery around the edges to make sure that you can keep an expensive superstar core. And that's what all successful teams in Edmonton's position has had to do. That's what Colorado did for a long time. That's what, Tampa Bay has done continuously to varying levels of success, but it's not novel. It's funny because I talked about, the NHL returning being on the horizon, but this does feel like the darkness before the light in terms of content. A lot of small stuff happened, but nothing too major in terms of what's exciting around the league. Unsurprising, but John Tavares is no longer captain of the Toronto Maple Leafs, handing it over to Austin Matthews. The Leafs are framing it not as if they're stripping him of the C, but it makes sense. Like Tavares isn't going to be in their long-term plans as even if he does extend there, like he's not going to be at the forefront of the team and has since fallen off of being like the leading piece of that team. The Tavares experiment didn't go to call it an experiment is probably reductive because he's been a valuable player for them. But regardless, they're making their best player their captain. I say this as a joke, but it is very funny to hear Toronto, like, we're changing nothing in terms of major pieces, but hey, we're going to change where the letters are, and now the team is solved. That's not what they're putting it forward as, but you can't help but laugh anytime the Leafs change anything. It just seems to be like reshuffling deck chairs on the Titanic.
This organization is getting dumber by the day.
Why is it dumb to make Matthews captain?
Because John Tavares is 1 year away from UFA, so why create an issue in the locker room over 1 year worth of captaincy?
It is not an issue. I would be surprised if this was an issue in the locker room. He's their best player.
You've been around enough locker rooms to know that there is no way that doesn't create at least a little bit of a weird dynamic. It doesn't have to be huge. In a very mature dressing room, a team can handle this properly and with grace. Is there anything about the Leafs locker room over the last 10 years that leads you to believe this is the team that can handle this properly?
They've not, but like Matthews has already been de facto one of the leaders in that room, and all it's doing is basically passing the torch off in the last possible way to say, hey, this is his team for the future. Tavares, if he does stay with his team, which isn't a certainty, that's a bonus, but he's not really going to be the guy.
No, I agree. There's two ways you can
I think the guys in the room can appreciate that. They're like, yeah, that's just business, and as long as Tavares handles it gracefully, which by all rights he has, I don't see it being a big issue.
Yeah, Tavares strikes me as the exact type of guy who would handle this well, but it's obviously got to piss him off. But for me, it's not even the fact that they did it, it's the when. He's a year away from an expiring contract. Matthews, we know, is going to be the leader of this team for a while. Okay. But then if your plan was always to give it to Matthews anyway, you can frame that as part of the contract negotiations with Tavares saying, hey, we'd like to keep you here. You're going to come in at a lower dollar, and we want to elevate his leadership role. So with this new contract, we're going to reduce yours, or however you want to politely say that. And you frame it into that. And he's like, okay, yeah, I'll take this dollar figure. I'll take an A. Okay, etc. Then you come out next summer, and then the fan base and Tavares is appreciative because he's got a new contract. He's sticking around, all that fun stuff. Natural change of leaders. To just shoehorn it into this offseason where you made no meaningful changes to the roster is what's confusing to me. It feels like you already alluded to, the Flex Seal guy slapping a strip of tape on the side of the Titanic as it's going down. Sure, in theory it helped, but how much did it really help? It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound is basically what the Leafs did here.
It's funny because, is this unfair criticism of the Leafs? Absolutely.
Well, I don't think it's unfair.
Well, because they can't do anything without it being, chastised as, well, how's that supposed to fix the defense? And they're probably like, well, it wasn't meant to fix the defense. We're just doing
something. We got OEL.
The way to solve that criticism when they do anything is to actually fix the problems then do all this stuff. If they had went out and traded Marner for a top pair defenseman and some cap flexibility, and then they use that cap flexibility to acquire another good player, and then they change the leadership, all makes sense. Nope, Flex Seal guy, let's go. Everything's solved.
Yeah, I still think that Marner is going to walk him right to the end, because
he should.
Nothing in this whole negotiation or process with Marner has indicated anything amicable in terms of the relationship between the two camps, and it really feels like that whole process was doomed the moment the contract was signed and he was walked into unrestricted free agency with this kind of leverage. I think my bet is currently on the slot of Mitch Marner refuses any trade, does not extend, and walks the Leafs right to the end, and they're going to lose him for nothing.
I hope so.
That makes me so happy.
It is very funny that this is all...
It's crazy that they announced the change in captaincy via TikTok dance, though.
Anyhow, that is the Toronto Maple Leafs and the not news over there. Quick, funny, time is a flat circle. Jacob Vrana is on a PTO with the Washington Capitals.
Reuniting with all his teammates from the championship in 2018, which includes Alex Ovechkin, John Carlson. I don't know if anybody else is left.
Elsewhere in the NHL, and this is actually somewhat interesting news, which is going to inform on a lot of what the upcoming years are going to look like. Jeff Vinik and the Tampa Bay Lightning are going through a little bit of a sale process where the overall valuation of the team will be up to $2 billion. Like, it's not going to be a full sale. Vinik is expected to retain some kind of stake in the team and is going to oversee operations for at least the first little while, but this is a big valuation for Tampa Bay has been very successful, but it is still, in terms of geography, a non-traditional hockey market, and that is huge for the NHL. Like, this is going to be Gary Bettman's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He is going to use this as leverage to get a $1 billion to $1.5 billion to maybe even more fee for expansion teams in the future. And this is why I am beating the drum of the NHL's not stopping at 32 teams, because if they can get to 36 and add $10 billion, to put an astronomical value out there that's going to be divided amongst the owners into the league, they're going to do that. This is big money, and these kind of valuations are exactly what Gary Bettman is looking for. So less about, the sale of the Lightning, because Vinnick seems to still be involved, but more about how this is going to affect the rest of the league.
I just hope the Yakuza buy them again.
This is going to be... Actually, that's a very funny, the whole Yakuza thing and all the hockey conspiracies where you're like, it's a conspiracy, but how true is this kind of thing? But the reality of the NHL now is that major, investment funds and conglomerates, and if you think about FSG and all the teams that they own, and Pittsburgh and Liverpool and the Red Sox, like all of that that's where the league is heading. So when you see very successful individual or like family owners, I wonder how long it's going to be before you see that go away completely. And like, for example, people are going to be thinking, oh, are you talking about the Ilitches? I think they would be among the last ever, if at all, to sell. Like, that is the Ilitch family's one of the major aspects of their legacy is the Red Wings. So I don't think that's necessarily on the table at all or anytime soon. But you look across the league, there's a lot of money to be had by owning a professional sports franchise, and people are going to be cashing out more like this in coming years.
It feels like not even like 5 years ago, New York or Toronto eclipsed the $2 billion mark in valuation. Now we've got the Tampa Bay Lightning having a $2 billion valuation. It's just wild to me. I don't even want to know what those teams would be worth.
Oh, you think of Montreal and you're talking at least 3, maybe. We're not the kind of people who, actually you are, Evan, but Brad and I aren't the kind of people to have that kind of money. So, it's purely a guess, but the top aspects of this league are going to be high dollar valuations. And then you think, well, if the NHL teams are worth this much, how much are NFL teams worth? My God.
I know we've had this conversation before, and I fear to know what that might be.
Small news, but it might have a cascading effect. Elsewhere, Ryan Getzlaf has popped up again. NHL Department of Player Safety, which was a little concerning because that means they're leaving their usual MO of someone being an incredibly dirty player and joining the NHL Player Safety team. Although I do remember when Ryan Getzlaf, he kicked a stick or slammed a stick off the glass when him and Perry were throwing a fit in that game against the Red Wings in the playoffs, and he got a 10-minute misconduct. So noted goon, Ryan Getzlaf.
Him and George Parros, teammates in Anaheim, right?
Yep, so there's a link there. So more former players in that space. And then elsewhere, Don Waddell talking about Patrick Laine. Interesting comments. Essentially saying in so many words, Laine may need to come back to the Blue Jackets and basically prove his value and dispel some concerns from other teams' GMs about, whether he can still show up and produce and do those things independently and combined. And also kind of maybe through a lifeline to say part of what wasn't working out for Laine was some stuff that wasn't great that happened in the locker room or locker room issues that Columbus was dealing with. So through part of his team, or at least the way the previous GM and coach oversaw the team under the bus, for the sake of saying, hey, this isn't Laine's fault, he's worth trading for, please trade for him. Because Laine wants out, and I'm sure Waddell wants to accommodate that too, because you don't want a guy who doesn't want to be on your team. Wonder what this does to his value overall.
I'm more curious about the locker room part of that comment, because that is not something you ever see GMs say. And because it does create the dynamic of trade value. Hey, it's not his fault. It's what was happening to him. It's understandable he wants out. We have dealt with it. Yet Laine still has his trade request on the table. So whatever the issue was in the locker room in his mind is likely still there. Otherwise, you would think he would have rescinded his trade demand. And it's a big contract for a very risky player. So that is a tough move. So this seems like one of those situations where it's very understandable that Laine wants out. it's very understandable that Waddell is having a hard time trading him because of the contract and all the uncertainty around him. And it might be it's almost certainly going to be one of those situations where Waddell's going to have to go to Laine. You're going to have to suck it up for a few months and score a ton of goals. Otherwise, there's nothing I can do here.
Might just be me, but I almost, like, people always say for the Red Wings, would you have brought in Laine? And I don't know if it fits anymore, right, with their current situation. But if a team I was a fan of was going to trade for Laine, like, I want to see that he can get back on the ice. It sounds harsh because he went through the player assistance program and he's gone through a lot, especially with his mental health. And, you know, it's really great that he's starting, you know, initiatives to do with helping people deal with that. And you only cheer for the guy personally, but if you're going to add him to your lineup, that's a lot of money on the cap. It's not a long commitment, but you want to know that this is a player who can stay healthy and be on the ice. It's a little bit of a, you know, that's business, but I don't blame, I guess is a better way of saying, I don't blame other GMs for having a little bit of trepidation of what version of Patrick Laine are you going to get. I do think it's there. Like you've shared previously, like he's the exact kind of player that you add if you have an opportunity to add him for cheap. But I get the sense that Columbus didn't want to deal him for cheap. They want to deal him for the Laine who can score goals at will.
Yeah, they shouldn't deal him for cheap. This is the great unknown. How bad is the situation that he may be walking back into this September? Because there's a non-zero chance he pops off for 40 goals this year. And that completely changes the dynamic of what Columbus is working with. They would be able to get premium back for him. They'd have teams competing against each other. Whereas right now, it's probably a bunch of teams throwing out a flyer for, like, yeah, we'll risk it, but we're not giving you much to make that risk because if it doesn't work out, he's stuck on our cap. Like, is there a team out there offering more than a second-round pick right now?
Yeah, I just don't think there's anyone offering anything close to what Columbus would want.
Exactly.
All right, why don't we wrap this up? We will jump into overtime in this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to join the Dub Club and get access to some really great benefits like our Patreon exclusive Discord, which is an excellent community. You also get access to all our bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones. We let loose, have fun, tell stories, show you some bloopers, answer any questions that didn't make it to the main show. You also get access to our bonus off-season episodes. So there's going to be 2 this week to catch up from last week, as well as another one coming your way. You are also automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, we give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast for all of that and more. Let's take some questions from our patrons here. Mott for Hart says, with Verona signing a PTO in Washington, I got thinking about other recent Red Wings players who are still UFAs. What are your predictions for Zadina and Kubalik? Overseas, PTO, or a contract at about league minimum? Do you think Verona can still make Washington? One more player if you'd like. Red Wings legend Mark Stahl. Does he retire or does someone give him a chance? With Zadina, I wonder if overseas is the answer for him. Like if you're not cracking San Jose where they're not going to keep you on the team and you walked away from that much money, and I just, maybe another team takes a chance on him, but even if they do, I don't see him sticking in the league at this point. I think he's destined for overseas, whether that be the KHL or somewhere else. Kubalik, I think he'll find a landing spot. I understand it didn't go that great in Ottawa, but people will look at Kubalik's history and his age and say, yeah, this guy can still be productive in a depth role and give you some depth scoring maybe, but I see Kubalik having a spot somewhere.
Not a lot of contracts get handed out this time of year. He might have to work his way through a PTO to even get that.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I think Verona can make Washington. Can he stick on Washington? I don't know, but I think there's a chance he makes it.
He's got the skill to do it. That's not the issue.
Whether he can put it all together and keep it all together on the ice, it wasn't just the player assistance program. There's the Red Wings and other teams. They thought the effort and his commitment to defense and team systems outside of what he wanted to play, that has been the story kind of following him. So who knows? And I think we've probably, without knowing more, you're not going to see much more of Mark Stahl at this stage in his career. Clint Benesh says, with the exceptional marker of free agents for next offseason, can we go under the belief that Steve Yzerman didn't spend this year so they'd have more space next year? I'd check cap friendly, but who's coming off the books at the end of the season and or who would be a major trade/buyout target to free up even more space? So I do think you're right in a way, Clint, at the very least of Yzerman didn't spend this year because this year's crop was nothing really to go nuts spending for. Whether next year informed on that is a different story. I do think that probably was part of the equation and adds into why I think it was smart to not overspend this year. But yeah, I think to a degree that was probably part of it.
I don't even think it's next year. I think it's 2 years. You look at all the contracts, we'll call them burdensome contracts that are coming off the books in 2 years, really, really does open up a lot of flexibility for Yzerman. And next summer, that's, I think, when the buyout discussions maybe become a bit more serious internally, because you only have a couple years of Copp at that point, which would be a palatable buyout, only 1 year of Hole, which might even be someone you can trade with a sweetener if he's at least competent this year. I think next year specifically wasn't the plan. I think it was just a general future flexibility, because as much as we criticize Yzerman for a lot of the poor decisions he made to basically be a cap team that will probably miss the playoffs, he does have the realization that, this isn't a cup team, but we have the flexibility to completely overhaul this roster in a couple of years, and the core pieces are in place. So he's still got a lot of work. It's nice to have that flexibility, but you have to do something with it, but it's there.
Jack Anthroleto says, for the rebuild to work, how important is it for the Red Wings to get a Chris Draper 3C type who doesn't score as often but supplements the defense? Is Draper's role the goal with Kasper at this point? And high contract aside, if Copp shepherds a grind line until Kasper's ready, is that worth Copp's value for the next 3 years? So the first part is, I don't think it's the most important thing, but I do think most successful teams do have, an effective third line center who can be productive, but also make sure that they are a pain in the ass to play against and an absolute nightmare defensively to try to score on.
They need to be able to score, though. The NHL as it is right now, you can't have two scoring lines and two checking lines.
No.
You need one of those top three lines to score and also be able to match up. Some teams, they use their first line for that because they've got, Barkov or whatever Selke candidate playing on their top line, and they're still going to put up 80, 90 points, so they don't have to worry about it. Other teams have, the Pasternak types on your top line where you're probably not going to line match them, so you need a line further down the lineup to be able to play that role. But your top three lines have to be threats on offense. Otherwise, you are not going to keep pace with the rest of the league. And yeah, if you want to go out there and have a fourth line that scores 12 goals a year but is just elite on the PK, elite shutdown, that is absolutely a huge benefit to winning games.
Yeah, long gone are the days of the hard and fast buckets. First line is scoring, second line you also scoring, third line check. Like it much as hockey is moving to be, I don't like the term, but a lot of people say positionless. I'd say a lot more dynamic in where players are on the ice. The lines are the same thing. Like there's no one hard and fast way to do it, but what you can't do is limit yourself where three guys are out there and they have no chance of scaring the other team's zone. To some degree, you need to have that pretty deep into your lineup. And, is Copp's value going to be worth it for the next 3 years? You can argue till you're blue in the face. Like if he has utility in making it an incredibly effective Red Wings line that leads to them winning games, then that is valuable. Is it worth the actual dollar number? I think with that dollar number and the overall term that he got, there has to be offense involved, but it's a spectrum, right? It's not, all or nothing. So if that is the most valuable way that you can get Copp into this lineup for the rest of the term of his contract, then that's what you do. Moving on, Schwarzkopf says, hey guys, longtime listener and first time question here. I went to game 3 of Griffins versus Admirals and noticed a lot of penalties for both teams and no available video review. Do you think the AHL should have all the available video reviews and related technology as the NHL? Why do you think they currently don't? And do you think the NHL should consider experimenting with rule changes / new technology in the AHL like the MLB does with their various minor leagues? They do to a degree use the AHL for that testing system. And the answer for missing technology is money. In the AHL, like a lot of these arenas, even if you had the money invested, they couldn't even put it in the arena. So, all right, shorter episode today, but we're going to wrap up the Winged Wheel podcast right there. Some quick notes. Next week, the episode is likely going to be coming out on Monday, so we're going to be a day delayed. unless anything changes. So just a heads up on that one. Patrons, you can expect 2 pieces of bonus content this week in terms of off-season episodes. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. Again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support us through Patreon. And if you want to support the show but Patreon's not for you, leave the show a rating wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe, leave the thumbs up on YouTube, subscribe and leave a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever. Tell a friend about the show. And again, if you want to come to Winged Wheel Podcast tonight at the LCA for the live show, the jerseys, all that and more, Saturday, November 9th. The link in the description or wingedwheelpodcast.com/Red Wings. Thank you to all of our listeners, new and old, and thank you to all of our patrons. We could not do this without you. Our name level supporters on Patreon: Arjun Shanker, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Victor Zetterberg, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. The Cheesebag Navy, Carl, Britannia Nanaluski, Carl Provi, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Seider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, Elizabeth Rose Alvarez, brand new name level supporter. Welcome, Elizabeth. Eric Hill, God Creatives, Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, Jim Kalmbach, Joe, Bag of Donuts, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Raul Pudd, Riley Enright, Ryan Britt, Scott Martin, Skeletor, Screen Lube, That's What I Appreciate About You, the new Jackson 5 Holes, Wellman's Elite Dancing D, Iserplan Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A. Aaron, A.B., Adam Rose, All Motor No Hands, Ann Stanislavski, Axel, Sandy Pellikka, Bellingham Acid Balls, Chimkim Nuggets, Chuck Buff Chest, the Tarpless Goon, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheeseback Space Force, Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Detsukes Dangleberries, Eric Nance, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, Ian, Jacob Zwaniga, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, Jim, J.M. Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans Derogatory, John Ingalls, Josh Yelton, Keenan O'Donohue, Brad is Wrong and Plays Like Sprong, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hall, Ophelia, Reed, Steven, The Hodag, The Hat 123, Trent Thorough, Wings fan in Chi-Town, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll talk to you next week. +1.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.